Tom DeFalco, welcome to Creator in Conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Uh, Prior to this conversation, I was trying to think where to begin, because like you've had an amazing career and everything that like so many great stories and characters you've got the opportunity to work with. So I was thinking personally to begin with, where I would have first actually come across your name. And I think I would have been like about nine at the time, but it would have been the DK Guide, Spider-Man, the Ultimate Guide, that book where you got to curate. And you think you did like FF and Hulk as well. But I remember the Spider-Man one, that was like a Christmas gift when I was nine. Loved it because here in Ireland, we used to get Panini, which used to be like Marvel UK and stuff. I think they bought them over. They reprinted a lot of the Spider-Man comics, and then I would get those reprints, but this guide really brought me up to speed. And I suppose just to begin with that, because you've done a couple of similar books in those veins, what was it like curating a book like that? Was that fun going through the like? Did you go through the archives on that one? Did people recommend material to you to cover when putting it together?
Well, that book was that was a strange assignment and a strange book for me because somebody I'm sitting home one day and I get a call. A gentleman with an English accent says to me, we'd like you to write a kind of an encyclopedia on Spider-Man. And I said to him, "Oh, you have the wrong guy." I said, Peter Sanderson is kind of, our historian. I said, "That's the guy you want." I said, "No, no, no, you were recommended to us," and blah, 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 blah. And I said, "Who recommended?" And they told me it was a gentleman by the name of Ralph Macchio, not the actor, the editor. And I called Ralph and I said to him, "Did you recommend me for some encyclopedia?" He said, "Sure." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, they wanted somebody who could write a book, and I know you write books." I said, "Yeah, mystery novels, Ralph. It's a whole different genre." And he said to me, "Well, I thought, I don't know, maybe this is something you could give to your nieces and nephews." And I thought, yeah, yeah, I guess I could give it to them because I couldn't give them any of my other stuff. Um, and I thought about it and thought, yeah, I've never done anything like this. Let me try it. And I, pulled out, all my Spider-Man comic books, and I had a pretty complete set of Spider-Man comics. Um, this is before Hurricane Sandy, which wiped out my comic book collection.
Oh, I know.
But I went through them and I started working on the book. And I think I was about halfway through the book when I thought, "Oh, wait a minute, you know, I know how to handle this now." Uh, and it took me halfway through the book to understand how to write a book like that. So I said, if they ever give me another chance, I have to do another one. Um, and I finished it, to the best of my ability. I turned it in. Everybody seemed to be pretty happy with it. I know it sold very, very well. Um, and I remember at one point, when I got a copy, I took it to my mother, and I said, "Hey, Mom, I did this," and she looked. She said, "Oh, you've written a book." I said, "Yeah, yeah, Mom, I've been writing books for years." She goes, "Yeah, but this is going to be sold in bookstores." I said, "Yeah, Mom, so are all the other books." She says, "Yeah, but nobody reads that other crap." which which I knew what she meant. I didn't take offense at it. I know what she meant, but I thought, oh, at least I made my mother happy.
That's it. Mothers always have a way of putting things into perspective, a way of delivering them as well.
They really do because when once I left staff on Marvel, um, from the point I left staff on Marvel until you know ultimately she passed away, um, my mother was convinced I was unemployed. Um, it was always saying to me, "Oh, you shouldn't sit home all day. You should go out and get a job." I said, "Mom, I really can't afford to go out and get a job. There's no job that'll pay me the kind of money I can make as a freelancer." um, but she said, "Oh, you can't sit home. You can't sit home depressed. You got to go out and get work." I said, "Mom, I have plenty of work. I'm good. Everything's fine." Um, but you know, she was always convinced I was unemployed. Uh,
It is funny. There's often the joke online where anyone who works in comics and it's like three different pictures. It's like what my family think I do, what my friends think I do, what I actually do, and it goes from like the real fun like life of leisure to like just sitting in front of a keyboard meeting the deadline.
I it always cracks me up because when I go to conventions, there are all these people want to get in, they want to get in comics and because they see us, the professionals at conventions, and they see us, signing autographs, cracking jokes, that sort of stuff, and they think this is what we do all day. And you know, I've said to people, listen, unless you are comfortable sitting in a room for 8 to 10 hours a day by yourself, it's not the field for you because you know that's what it is. Just sitting there, usually in a darkened room. As you can see, the lighting in this room is not great, but it doesn't have to be great because all it has to be is me and my computer. The curtain behind me is a blackout curtain um, because the view out there it's a view of I live on the water, a beautiful ocean view.
Oh, lovely.
I keep that blackout curtain because I'm not supposed to be looking at the view when I come into this room.
Well, that's really interesting to hear because I know it's funny. I've heard Tom King say he's really described working in comics, particularly as a writer, that it's very much a blue collar job. You got to get up, you got to put the hours in. And I've heard people, authors of various genres saying sometimes the task is just to write, even if you're not happy with what you're writing that day, just to put something down because it's like a discipline and a muscle memory. And Stephen King has his approach of like playing music and stuff when he's knocking something out. So do you have a particular routine or approach that you prefer? Like, do you walk in silence, or do you like to have a TV on in the background? And is this something that you've developed over time, or has it just come to you naturally as you found your own comfort zone in writing?
Well, when I was really, really into it, these days I'm much lazier. I barely put in, half a day's worth of work at this stage.
Yeah.
But back in the day when I would, my routine was when I was fully freelance, I'd get up every morning about 6:30, um, make some coffee. By quarter to seven, I was sitting down, turning on the computer, and I'd work till maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At which time I'd take a break and have a meal, and sometimes take a nap, and you know then depending on what was going on, either make a bunch of phone calls, let the editors know, yes, I'm still alive. you know, here are your pages. And then go back to work. Sometimes I'd skip dinner. Sometimes I'd have dinner, and then many a time after dinner I'd go, come in and think, oh yeah, I just have to you know, fix this one line of dialogue, this one paragraph, this one whatever the heck. And then about 2 o'clock in the morning, I turn off the computer, go to bed, and 6:30 get up again, and that was the routine.
It,
Um,
it,
I would lock myself in my office here. Um, uh, my my wife referred to it as the cave. Uh, this is before they even called, things like man caves. Just
That's it.
you're in that darkened cave. you know. Uh,
No, it is. It's very interesting though, because the taking of breaks is equally important as well. I find with students, obviously, I'm surrounded more so by students, but young professionals as well. There's a real anxiety among them when it comes towards like taking a break. 'Cause they feel if I'm not writing something, if I'm not up to midnight, then I'm doing it wrong, or they feel they have to, and they find it hard. Not all students. Some students could use with that motivation, but some it's kind of like they're afraid almost to take the break. And often we be encouraging, no, don't skip a lunch, take that break because you might go back and see something differently or catch a mistake before you submit and things like that. So it can be tricky finding that balance early on. And when you was in the editor's seat as well, because obviously you've been on both sides of the table, like you've been, contributing as a writer, but then also and engaging with the editors in that capacity. But then you also like the main editor, the editor in chief as well. Did you have any um, particular philosophy or approach when, liaising with all the creators that you either picked up from, your experience prior to sitting into such a role, or did you develop it as an editor? So like how to reach out to creatives or how to help guide them if you felt there was an issue with deadlines or keep the peace in some cases, because often sometimes you might find yourself being the peacekeeper. How'd you juggle that kind of, component, I suppose?
well, I kind of became an editor by mistake.
Okay.
Um, I was I had started my career at Archie Comics and ended up, doing some editing there. But then as I started to write more and more, I, was working at Archie. I think ultimately 2 days a week, mainly doing digest books and stuff like that. Um, and at a certain point, Jim Shooter was reorganizing the editorial department and asked me to come on as an editor. And I was reluctant to do it because I hadn't had a full time job in years. Um, and he initially said to me, "Well, can you do it for 6 months? You know, just till I get everything organized." And I said, "Yeah, I can do anything for 6 months." So I came on as an editor for what I thought was be 6 months. Um, and I remember he gave me the Spider-Man books, and I remember saying to him, "Jim, why are you giving me? I'm the new guy. I should get all the crummy titles. The Spider-Man book should go to somebody more experienced." And he said to me, "Yeah, Spider-Man, it's just like Archie, except with superpowers." And I thought about it and said, nah, Spider-Man is closer to Bugs Bunny than he is to Archie. But yeah, I could see it. Um, and, I ended up having a lot of fun editing. Um, I you know, I had really great teams of writers. I managed to pick out, you know, some great people to work with. Um, and I just enjoyed the whole editing experience. I enjoyed interfacing with the other writers, working out plots and the details of stories, and had a lot of fun with the artists. You know, I am not an artist. I can't draw. I can't tell an artist how to draw, but I can tell if they're visually telling us what we need to see. Um, and I also got to work with Mark Grunwald, who's my initial assistant, and Mark. Every wonderful thing you've heard about Mark was true, and not quite on the money because it was even better than all of that. Uh, uh, you know, One of the advantages of having been a freelancer first is every once in a while you deal with you know freelancers who were coming up with lame excuses as to why their work wasn't in. And I once remember talking to a freelancer, said, "Don't," it gave me a story. I said, "Don't ever tell us an editor that. No editor is going to believe that bullshit story." And I said, "Here's four better excuses." And I gave him four better excuses as to why he was late with the work. Because I knew he was full of shit. uh, and you know, I, as the years went by, the only thing I've missed was the edit. Was actually editing.
Mm.
Um, you know, because of my, you know, I'll often say my own incompetence. Um, Marvel when I started, a lot of the books were very late, and they hired this woman, Virginia Ramita, John Ramita's wife, to put a schedule together. And I remember looking at the schedule, thinking, I don't know how to, I don't know how I'm ever going to get to this schedule. And I turned to Rooney and I said, "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell all the writers we need a plot every 3 weeks. If we don't get a plot, we're going to commission a fill-in. We're going to tell all the pencilers, do a book you know, every 3 weeks. Otherwise, fill-ins." Because I said, they're monthly books. If we do one every 3 weeks, science says we have to eventually catch up on the schedule. And we did. And we even beat the schedule. We got to the point where, when the ad flats would come in, we turn in a whole month's worth of books. And that was my goal, because I figured, hey, if I get everything on schedule, then I don't have to come into the office and I can go back to freelance. And because I managed to get my books on time, at a certain point, they decided to promote me to like second in command to Jim Shooter, which when they promoted me, they said, "Oh, you'll still be able to edit." Yeah, bullshit. uh, and then and then at a certain point, when the company wanted to make a change, they decided to promote me again. And I always remember when I found out that they were going to let Shooter go and they wanted to put me in charge. Now, the truth of the matter is, I could tell that Shooter was not long for the world, because he was making power plays against, like, the president of the company.
Okay.
when you go after the king,
Yeah.
um, and and I just could see that the handwriting was on the wall. But I always assumed that since I was second in command, they'd fire both of us.
Mhm.
Um, and had actually, was pursuing a job outside of comics at the time. Shooter was fired, and I found out that they were going to put me in charge. And I remember the president of the company, I turned to him and said, this gentleman by the name of Jim Golden, I said, "Mr. Golden, I think you're making a big mistake." I said, "I'm really a freelancer masquerading as a staff person." I said, "As far as I'm concerned, you put me in charge, all I'm going to do is try to make life better for freelancers, because I'm not a company man." And he said to me, "Well, that's what you should be doing." And when he said that to me, I thought, "Oh, wow, maybe I should take this job then." Um, and and I ended up taking the job. Um, and I always remembered, I called Grunwald in and I told him when I was going to quit. And he said, "You just took the job. You're telling me when you're going to quit?" I said, "Well, yeah. I, you know, I figured out that I was going to quit within 4 years, because I said, it took, Shooter was editor in chief, and it took him about 9 years to go crazy. But I'm much more efficient than he is, so I'll go crazier sooner. So I want to get out before I go crazy." Um, I ended up staying longer because things just kept happening, and I thought, you know, uh, the company went public, and the Perlman people came in and that sort of thing. And at one point, I said to Bruni, you know, when these kind of corporate people come in, they always fire the people and they put their guy in charge. We're going to position you as their guy.
Very
Um,
clever.
yeah, things didn't quite work out the way we had, but I always remember when I first spoke to the Perlman people, the the boss said to me, "So, what is your next move?" And I said, "Out the door." And he said, "Well, what do you mean out the door?" I said, "I'm editor in chief. I'm at the highest creative level I can be. Anything above me is pure administration. I don't want to do any of that." He says, "Don't you want to be publisher someday?" I said, "No." I said, "Yeah, publisher is you spend all day looking at contracts, dealing with distributors." I said, I'm a creative guy. I'll miss a decimal point that'll put the company out of business. So no, I don't want to be a publisher." And he said, "Well, come on, maybe we'll set up an animation studio. You can do animation." Ah, been there, done that. I'm just going back to full time writing. And ultimately, when the company ended up making its move, it wanted to, put me, you know, send me to foreign countries to kind of work with other publishers the way I'd worked with Marvel UK at one point. And I said, no, I don't want that job. I'm going back to full time writing. I remember the guy from the Perlman police called me up. He says, "You are going out the door, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, I told you I was going out the door." Uh,
That one.
you know,
No, it's really insightful to hear from that side of things, and it's great as well that you had your own measure as well, and it sounds as if as well you had the real passion for writing as well. That's always the privilege, isn't it, when you're able to find your way to that which you love to be your work, to be your career. So,
yeah.
um, when it came towards, you mentioned it earlier about some of your prose work as well. Just before I might pivot into that as well, but just before, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you do some Phantom stuff as well with Moonstone back in the day?
Yeah, I did a Phantom, I guess, novelette for
Yeah.
them. Um, a lot of my other work, know, I exist on many planes of reality. Uh, and I made certain deals over the years that you know the publishers can't reveal who my pen name is, and I can't reveal it either. So,
Okay.
but I'm just I've always said I'm a very very lucky guy. I've managed to do a lot of fun stuff, um, and I've had a lot of fun over the years.
No,
So,
absolutely, absolutely. And when it comes towards the fun side of it, like what would be some of your lasting memories or the points that you look forward to? Like, would it be, do you go to like any of those film premieres that they do now with the MCU films and there's so much buzz around them? Or you mentioned going to conventions as well. That must be fun where you where people reach out and say, "Hey, travel here and there." I suppose it's even better when you're a writer and not connected with the publisher. 'Cause I imagine with the publisher, there's more logistics. But if you're going as the the guest, the talent guest, it must be far more enjoyable. But where's the furthest you've traveled actually in your career? Like how far has comics taken you, as it were?
oh, comics have taken me all around the world. The when I was editor in chief, um, um, I suddenly became the worst writer in comics. You know, I was, I suddenly became the biggest hack and the biggest bum. Um, and I used to read the reviews that the only reason I was still writing comics was because I was editor in chief. And I thought, yeah, what about the 40 years before that? but whatever. Um, and when I would go to conventions as editor in chief, basically I had a target on my chest. Um, People would come and complain to me about all sorts, any problem they ever had with the company, they would come and complain to me about. Um, you know, People come up to me, why did Jack Kirby leave? I don't know. I was in high school at the time. uh, and and oftentimes I always remember one time I was walking with Mark Rold. Somebody came up to me and says, Tom, I'm so sorry about things. I hope we can, put the past, to bed, and that you won't have any hard feelings and blah 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 blah. And I said to him, yeah, sure, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. He walks away, and I turned to Google and said, you have any idea who that was? or what he's apologizing for? And I found out later on it was a guy who wrote a bad review about something that I had written. And he was trying to get work at Marvel, and he wasn't having any luck. And he thought it was all because he wrote a bad review about something that I'd written. I'm thinking, yeah, not a chance. I don't have time to read. I don't have time to read the good reviews or the bad reviews. Come on. Uh,
Oh, God.
and as when I was editor in chief, I had a very strict rule. I didn't get involved in any of the creative decisions. You know, you're the editor. It's up to you to figure out who you think should be the writer, who you think should be the pencil, who you think. And as a result, I stayed away from the creative end of things. And I stayed away from the creative people, which, these days I go to conventions and I run into people. They say, oh, I worked for you with this and that. I'm thinking, I never met you. I didn't, I'm sorry. you know, uh, I don't really know you because I only dealt with the editors. I didn't deal with the actual creators.
Mhm.
Um, and that was just a conscious decision because I felt I had to hold the editors responsible for the sales of their books. And if I was telling them, use this guy, use that guy, how can I hold them responsible? Uh, you know,
Mm. Yeah.
I only looked at books. The books that I looked at were the ones that were going down in sales. And in that case, a lot of times Grunwald and I would sit there and try to, we'd read a couple of issues before it started going down, and then we'd read the downslide and see if we could figure out what was the problem. And then
Yeah.
we, go and sit down with the editor and say, we noticed that, you know, every issue you start
Okay.
with a close up of somebody's angry face. If you do that 3 issues in a row, people are going to buy the book. They're going to open it up. They're going to think they already bought this issue. Various splash
Yeah.
pages. Things like that.
Oh, absolutely. It went. Did you do many portfolio reviews at conventions when you were in the EIC chair, or would you kind of leave that to, as you mentioned, you wouldn't get involved so much with the creative, so you would leave that to the other editors like Mark and stuff?
As time went on, I did less and less.
Hmm. Yeah.
Just because when I went to conventions, I was, going from meeting to meeting.
Hmm.
Um, when I was an editor, I did a lot of portfolio reviews.
Yeah.
You'd go over it, you'd look at the stuff, and I, found a couple of people that, wow, I think Mark Bagley. I
Yeah.
think I gave him his first professional job.
Wow. Amazing.
Um, and you know, back in the day, there were a lot more, portfolio reviews and that. Life was a lot simpler. Nowadays, I think if you want to show somebody a story idea or that sort of stuff, they got to sign like a million documents before they could look at it. Um,
Yeah. It's so funny because like since doing this podcast, we've had, Paul Kupperberg, Elliot S. Magin, Paul Levitz, and a lot of them would describe how just by living in New York, they could actually walk in physically to reception and, ask for work, show work, get an interview. Now, if you would even attempt that, for security, you'll probably be set down, to escort you off premises. It's very much more of a machine now. But I suppose with technology, there's, more emails and forms and attachments. But I remember doing the Marvel reviews myself in New York once, and the way it goes now is you fill in a form and you submit like a copy, a photocopy or scan of your work, and then they put up a list. It's like being in school to see if you get called to get the review. It's many moving components to it. But just actually last season we had Howard Mackey join us in. He was the season finale for season two. And he was just mentioning because recently we just done the Steve Ditko documentary, and he had mentioned that you had informed him and basically everyone in Marvel that if Steve Ditko ever came in looking for work to find him somewhere, even if he didn't ask to offer, because as in Mark's words, sorry, Howard's words, you described him as being foundational to the Steve Ditko, foundational to Marvel. And I was just wondering, what was that like with your interactions with Mr. Ditko? It must have been really interesting. The guy behind Spider-Man, of course, your association with Spider-Man, and then being in that position to help him, particularly in the 90s, bring him back into the fold with Marvel again in some ways. Was there ever further plans that you had, maybe to reunite him with any of his characters at Marvel, or anything like that?
Well, it's funny, Steve. A lot of people have this notion of Steve Ditko as this antisocial loner, um, and he was really a very charming, friendly guy. Um, my first dealings with Ditko, um, Denny O'Neil had been hired at Marvel, and I had worked with Denny at DC. And he called me up and he says, "Would you like to write Machine Man?" I said, "Machine Man? Sure." I said, "Steve Ditko's drawing that, isn't he?" He says, "Yeah, but Steve wants to see the first plot before he decides if he's going to stay on the book." And I thought, oh well, Marv Wolfman had been writing it. I thought, I'm no Marv Wolfman, so no Steve Ditko. Um, and I turned to my first plot, and a couple of days later, I get this call, and this voice on the phone says, "Are you Tom DeFalco?" I said, "Yes." And he says, "What gives you the right to write about heroes?" And I thought, "What gives me the right to write about heroes?" I said, "Who is this?" He says, "This is Steve Ditko." And then he and I had like an hour and a half long discussion on what is a hero, what the philosophy of heroes, the um, you know, what is the essence of a hero, what makes someone a hero, what makes someone an anti-hero, that sort of thing. And it was just a long, detailed discussion. Got kind of heated at times, that sort of thing. And at the end of the conversation, he says, "Well, this has been fun. We should do it again." And he says, "I have to go now." And he hung up. And I thought, yeah, I still don't have any idea if he's going to stay on the book. He ended up staying on the book. Um, that Machine Man, Denny and I, the book at the time was not selling well, so we decided we were going to do a hyper Marvel kind of thing where every sentence had like 50 adjectives in it, which is like totally the reverse of my normal writing style. Um, I look back on it and think, what were we thinking? But Steve and I ended up working together, and we ended up having a lot of fun. He said to me that my plots were too detailed, that he wanted me to cut it down. I said, "Okay, Steve, what would you like in terms of a plot?" He says, "A paragraph would be good enough." And I said, "A paragraph?" And I said, "All right, I'm going to do my best to cut down to a paragraph." The best I ever got was like, I think 2 pages.
Yes.
Because I always like to explain, This is
Yeah.
what this character's feeling. This is what that character's feeling. That, um, but then when I became an editor at Marvel, I the first thing I did is I put a candy jar on my desk because I know freelancers, you know. And then as soon as I could, I put a coffee pot and then started putting donuts there because I know freelancers. Steve would always stop by for a cup of coffee and we'd sit down and we'd get into all these just fascinating discussions about, you know, old movies, novels, you know, articles we had read. We discussed pretty much every topic in the world except comic books. I never discussed comic books with Steve Ditko. uh, and at some point, I come up with this character, which I called Speedball, and I thought, yeah, this is the kind of character I think Steve would have fun with. So I asked him if he'd be interested, and he read it. He said, yeah, yeah, I could do it. I said, yeah, listen, Steve, you can handle the plot, you can handle it all. I'll do the origin story. After that, it's your baby. He didn't want to write the dialogue. I said, well, we'll get somebody to write the dialogue. Don't worry about it. Um, and I think he had a lot of fun with Speedball.
Yeah.
It unfortunately did not sell all that well, so it didn't last all that long in his own book. But we ended up bringing him back in the New Warriors later on. And I always found Steve to be just a charming, friendly guy.
Yeah.
At one point, when we were going to do the 2099 line,
Mhm.
Stan had this character, Ravage, and
Yeah.
I said to him, "Hey, Stan, if you could choose any artist in the world to draw this, who would you choose?" And he said, "I'd really like to work with Steve Ditko again." I
Yeah.
said, "Oh, well, we can call him up and ask him if he wants to do it." So we arranged a meeting for Stan and Steve, and they hadn't seen each other in years.
Yeah.
And Stan saw Steve, he ran up to him, threw his arms around him, and said, "Hey, Steve, it's great to see you." And Steve gave Stan a hug. And you could tell, these are two guys that had great respect for each other and kind of liked each other. And we had a very nice discussion. Um, Ultimately, Steve said that the Ravage character was not for him,
Mhm.
um, for assorted reasons. It just didn't fit his ideas of what he wanted to do. And then he passed on that, and we found some other work for Steve to do. And I always remember as Stan and I were walking down the hall. Stan turned to me and says, "Tom, can you tell me why Steve quit Spider-Man?" I said, "No, no, I can't. I think I was in high school at the time. I have no idea."
Between that and the guy with the Jack Kirby comment, everyone like, what were you doing in high school that everyone thinks you have these answers?
Who knows? I mean, they people assume that if you're working for Marvel, you know all of the Marvel secrets and stuff. And I, when I became editor in chief, I found out there were no Marvel secrets. You know, I, when I first became editor in chief, I ended up having lunch with Stan. I met him at a convention. We had dinner together. I said, "Stan, how do you do this job?" He says, "I don't know. You just make it up as you go along." He says, "Here's the best part about it, Tommy. Because you're editor in chief, everybody just think you know what you're talking about. So don't worry about it." Um,
Oh, there you go. That's amazing. That's amazing. And I suppose just sticking in with some of the Marvel and Spider-Man vibe of things as well. Of course, Spider-Girl is another a breakout character for you as well in working in with the Mayday character. With so much happening in the Spider-Verse, vein of things and the film franchises with Sony and all. It seems like it's probably just going to be like imminent that we see some kind of an adaptation or something around it. Do you ever keep an eye on an ear out for any of that? Like, how involved are creators when it comes towards the film side of things? Because I know at the end of films you see like a thank you. Do you have any forewarning if they're going to do anything, or is it just like a nice surprise afterwards?
it tends to be more of a surprise.
Mm.
Um, I always remember before the Spider Verse movie came out, the first Spider Verse movie.
Mhm.
At one point, somebody called me up and said to me, "Oh, we'd like to invite you out to the premiere of the Spider Verse." And I said, "Oh, thank you very much," and blah 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 blah. And I remember getting off the phone, and my wife said, "What was that?" I said, "That invited me to some, premiere of a Spider-Man movie." She says, "Oh, are we gonna go?" I said, "Yeah, come on, forget about it." I said, you know, my experience going to movie premieres is you sit around for 3 or 4 hours and then watch a movie that you ultimately wish you hadn't seen, and and then you got to make nice with everybody. If I can get out of going to a premiere, I'm getting out of going to a premiere. And then about a Marvel, had these friends and families where they show us an advance cut of the film the week before it comes out. And a week before that, I get a call from somebody who wants to interview me about Peter Porker. Um, how did you come up with Peter Porker? Blah, 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 blah. So I give him the whole story, that sort of thing. And then as we finish up the interview, I said, not for nothing, but why are you asking me about Peter Porker of all things? And he says, "Are you familiar about the Spider Verse movie?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to go see it next week." He says, "Did you know that Peter Parker's in the movie?" I said, "Peter Parker's in the movie? Why the hell is Peter Parker in the movie?" uh, so that's when I found out that Peter Parker was in the first Spider-Man first movie. Um,
That must have been a surreal moment, both first hearing it and then witnessing it on the
yeah,
screen.
I've been thinking, oh wow, hey, they did a pretty good job with it too. Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, most of the time we have no idea, what's happening, or why. Um, I think that it's nice to get a thank you at the end of the film. Um, it's even nicer to get a royalty check from these things.
True. That's it. Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to see that at least they're keeping the connection with the creators. Sometimes I think in the first forays into Hollywood, there was kind of a real disconnect with the comics, and I think now it's swinging it back around that they realize now these are the creators who make it possible, given the stories to mine and to build the foundation of the stories they're telling as well. And yeah, there's been so much being like in terms of adaptation. Did you ever have much interaction or many reach out to you from like the world of video games, for example? Because I know cinema is one aspect, but now it seems, depending on the day of the week, the reporters will say, video games is the future for entertainment now. And again, obviously, particularly again with Spider-Man and other superhero characters, a lot kind of swings around into those adaptations. But did you ever, in your career, have much dealings with video game companies or adaptations in that regard?
Yeah, many years ago, I worked on a few video games and stuff like that. And they would send me the cartridges, but I've never owned a video game system.
Fair,
I would
fair.
al- I would often ask Ron Lim because he played a lot of video games. Which system should I get? And then he would give me the pros and cons of the different systems, and all it would do is confuse me because I'd say, "But which one should well, if you like this kind of game, you get this one. If you like that kind of game, with this." But I don't know. I didn't play any of the games. But yeah, over the years we worked on a bunch of things here and there. The Mortal Kombat ones with the Spider-Man, the Marvel characters and stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, a little bit of everything over the years.
Yeah.
Uh,
And also going back, not games, but more ties, of course, the G.I. Joe franchise as well. There's so much there. I think I'm hearing Danny McBride is working on a new film. I think he's taking it from the base from the animated show, possibly. But it's curious because he's not doing it as a comedy, as far as I'm aware. I often associate him with comedy, but he seems to be really excited to do it. But with GI Joe, like you were pretty much instrumental in building up like the files and the background and a lot of the characters and the lores it was. How was that like? How was that experience compiling all of that? And now it's still like that's again foundational to a lot of the stuff that they do with the characters and the franchise today.
well, yeah, I always want to, with GI Joe, 99, 0.9% of GI Joe is Larry Hama. All right, Larry
Yeah.
Hama, was the be all, in GI Joe, the real genius there. I would love to take credit for Larry's work, uh, but I could even I couldn't do that with a straight face.
Yeah.
Larry is one of the unsung geniuses of the comic book industry. He's just a great writer, a great artist, great editor. Um, all I can do is sing his praises. Don't tell him I said anything nice behind his back. Archie Goodwin, I think, came up with the uh, the name Cobra Command. Um, but like I say, most of that was Larry. I was the project manager, the editor of the first couple of issues, but basically I got to sit back and look and go, wow, Larry's a genius. um,
That.
as a result of that, I ended up doing a lot of work with Hasbro over the years and a couple of the other toy companies. Um, Worked on a whole bunch of different toy projects, and some were fun and some not so much fun. But you know, but, the nice thing about Marvel, we got to do a lot of different crazy stuff. Um,
Yeah.
I often look, people ask me, were you involved in the movies? I said, I was involved in every version of Spider-Man, the Spider-Man movies, except the ones that actually got made. Because I worked on
Never.
like 4 or 5 Spider-Man movies, but none of them got made. Um, you know, I worked on a couple of Fantastic Four movies. One of them actually did get made, which yikes, the John Carpenter one. Um, and a lot of my time when I was editor in chief is we could not give our licenses away.
That's
Um,
crazy compared to today, isn't it? That's just
Very
incredible.
crazy, but we couldn't give the licenses away. Um, our first hit was the X-Men cartoon show. That
I
was
know
the
that's
first,
back. Yeah.
you know, we got something going. Um, and even that, had a very rocky start. Um, it, it took Marvel a long time to, get up and running. But now you can't walk into a store without seeing Marvel merchandise and stuff like that. Um, I look back and remember how desperate we were and how desperate I was for licensing to manage this to make a profit, or one of the other sections of the company to make money, because anytime the company was in trouble or needed money, they would come to me.
Yeah.
And I want the other sections to stop making money too. So you go to somebody else
Oh God,
every
yeah.
once in a while. Uh, it was a crazy time. Um,
Yeah. But everything that you guys were doing, like it was the success. like that we see today wouldn't be if it wasn't for what came before at the same time. Like even as you mentioned there, like the X-Men show from the 90s, that's back now. That's the number one streaming on Disney. And you know, a lot of the stories now they're adapting, it must be rewarding to see, you know, that the success it's finally hitting the target. But I imagine it must also be somewhat frustrating that it's hitting it, you know, 20 years down the line, but you guys had set the foundation and the seeds for it, you know, because it's just that it's found it's whatever it was to get in to get to click with the mainstream audience. Really, it was the MCU. Like it was the 2008 with Iron Man. I think it was the mainstream movies. Once it hit cinema, it kind of, you know, eased away some of the stigma, if you want to call it, of readers of comics, you know. And of course, technology, everyone's reading more now on smartphones and tablets, so it's much more accessible for them to access it. Did you ever have much in the realm of digital publishing yourself? Like, did you do much in the way of digital comics or digital publishing in that regard?
Uh, um, I did some, handful of digital comic books over the years and that
Hmm.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember, having arguments with editors and publishing companies saying that, you know, the digital sales are your sales. You're not competing with digital sales. You know, and it took a while to convince editors that digital sales were sales.
Yeah.
uh, you know, and I was stunned a few years ago to discover that hardcover books had suddenly had a resurgence, and hardcover books have been growing in sales over the last couple of years, which I never thought I would see that again in my lifetime. Um,
Yeah. It's
but
been really interesting. The like I remember when I first started lecturing, I was teaching business and video game students. It was one of the first things I would lecture in. And at the time, they were saying that we're going back, I don't know, 15 years, everything's on the rise for digital. They were saying digital, like the print is going to be dead. But what they didn't account for was the reason it's on the rise is because more people are buying tablets and phones. And then what happens now? Everyone has a tablet and phone. So everything's flatlining in digital because there's no growth. It was growing because it was new technology. Now it's flatlining. So then what does everyone do? They get itchy fingers. They like to collect. So next thing, vinyl comes back, print comes back. As you say, hardback, you know, the prestige editions are coming back. It's like we are so cyclical. The consumer base is so cyclical. It's like if you're lucky enough, you can just time it when to step in, you know? It's like a merry-go-round, just get on the right one. But it is curious. Are you still avidly, you know, reading, collecting books yourself, like hardback comics, stuff like that? Or do you have a preference?
well, I am, I'm a readaholic.
Hmm.
Um, I probably do not read as fast as I used to. I used to, read at least a book a week. Um, I've slowed down. Everything is slowing down for me. What can I tell you? Um, but yeah, I still go to the library on a regular basis and pick out, a handful of books. Um, I It's funny with me. If I'm reading fiction, I like to hold the book in my hand. If
Hmm.
I'm reading nonfiction, I don't care if it's digital or what.
Okay,
Uh,
interesting.
comics I still prefer. You know the hard, the copies.
Yeah,
Uh, Even though every once in a while when somebody wants to send me reference, they usually send it digitally.
yeah.
Um,
But it's a very tactile, you know, mentality, particularly with comics. It's well, I can see the benefit to the digital, and I think many people now they might, if they have digital, they get it, but then they always end up buying the trade. You know, it's almost like the home release versus the cinematic field. And what about any projects yourself? Do you have much like you have any passion projects burning at the moment, or upcoming projects that you're tipping away with at the moment?
well, I am. You know, I'm working on a couple of things that you know haven't been announced yet, so I can't,
I understand. Yeah,
just
absolutely.
so I'm working for with a new publisher called eight was it 24/7.
Oh, yeah, we know them. Howard was mentioned them. He's working with them as well. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I'm doing some, fun, goofy projects with them. Uh,
Great.
because at this stage of my life, I just want to have some fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I recently did a story for the Conan Titan Conan people.
Great.
Uh, it was an 8-page backup um, featuring a character you've probably never heard of, Breckenwood Elkins,
Okay.
a Robin E. Howard character.
Awesome.
So somewhere along the line, they told me that they'd like me to do a Conan story, uh, which I'm thinking, yay! I finally get to do a Conan story. When I joined Marvel, the only character I wanted to do was Conan. But Roy Thomas was doing Conan then, and Roy is
Yeah,
there's no one finer than Roy uh, doing Conan. So anytime Conan was available, I wasn't. Um, but it was
that,
something I always wanted to do a Conan story, never got around to it.
that's great. So you finally had to, you got to him, you just had to go to a different publisher in the end.
So somewhere along the line, hopefully, if I stick around long enough, I might get to do a Conan story. Um, but it's funny when it comes to comics and things like that. You know, I, there are certain characters always wanted to get my hands on. Captain America was one of them. I did few stories, a few fill-ins here and there, and played with the character many times. But I don't really have the passion project kind of thing. I
Gotcha.
I was never the kind of writer who'd come up with I have a great idea for a Captain America story. You know, I was more the kind of writer where somebody'd say, "Hey, listen, I need a Captain America story. You have any ideas?" And I'd say, "No. When do you need the story?" You'd go Friday. I'd say, "By Friday, I'll have a story for you." Um, I was kind of a utility hitter. Um, in the course of my career, I did a whole bunch of fill-ins, fill in here, fill in there. Wherever anybody needed something, I'd pop in and do a story for them. Um, depending on the character.
Okay.
That's how Ron Friends and I ended up on Thor. Um,
Okay.
you know, we had gone to the editor to pitch for Daredevil, and he said, "Yeah, listen, right now my biggest problem is Thor. I need a fill-in." I said, "Oh, you need a fill-in? Ron and I can do a fill-in for you." So we did it. We did a fill-in for him, and he liked it. He asked us to do a second one. We did a second one, and then he offered us Thor, and I said, "We don't do Thor. We don't do Cosmic." He said, "You just did two fill-ins." I said, "Yeah, I can do a fill-in on any book in the line, but there's a difference between doing a fill-in and doing it on a monthly basis." And no, and then I spoke to Ron, and Ron said, "I'd love to do Thor." I said, "Oh, I guess we're going to do Thor then."
That sounds like a great joke. It's like, how do you get Thor pitch for Daredevil? It's amazing. Oh, that's brilliant. But no, it's Tom, it's great to have this opportunity to speak with you, and it's wonderful to see, the enthusiasm for the writing still there, and as you were saying, you're finding fun with it, and that's awesome because sometimes, you know, you you hear from folks, or you even just observe it in the industry, a lot of it just seems to be a grind for people, or there's a weariness now to a lot of the work and a lot of it coming out. And as you mentioned, it is a job. It can be, putting those 8 plus 10 hours in, a room in isolation to get it done. But at the same time, it seems once you get that, that flow state with it, there seems to be nothing better, to it, seeing that story come to life.
Well,
So
it's listen. I've had my moments too, where there many a time at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd say to myself, this is the last job I'm ever doing. And there, I remember one time I finished a job and I took my typewriter, walked downstairs, and I threw it in the garbage can because I was thinking I'm going to turn this in and then I'm done. uh, yeah, luckily I got home before they picked up the garbage. um, because you can have some frustration and that sort of thing. Um, but especially with comic books, there's a joy to comic books that you don't really experience in any other medium. Comic books, everybody's on the same team. We're all trying to do the best we can, and I just love the team sport of comic books. And I'm a lucky guy. I've been paired with some great artists over the years. Ron Friends and I've been working together for 40 plus years of that. Uh, People say to me, how long are you going to keep this partnership up? I said, well, we have it on our list to break up, but we just haven't gotten around to it yet. Ron Friends, Pat Olive, Paul Ryan, Ron Lim, Herb Trimpe, John Buscema, Sal Buscema. I've been so lucky that so many great guys that I've gotten to work with. And comics there's a joy to comics. I have decided that I'm getting to the point where it really is time to retire. But even though I'm going to retire, I'll still do comic books because
Yeah.
comic books don't count. Comic books I do for fun these days.
Echoing the sentiments of your mother there, where it's like comic books don't count.
Yeah, listen, I love the comic books. I love the structure of comic books. The craft of comic books. And it's all about. There is a real craft to this, a real structure. Um, People think you sit down and you just write whatever comes out of your brain. No, no. Structure, 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 and then fall back on structure. Um,
Amazing. No, that's this has been great. Thanks so much, Tom. Wonderful conversation. Very best of luck with the upcoming projects. I'm excited to see when they're announced. Where can folks follow you? Do you have an online presence you like to share, like a blog or any social media handles, anything like that?
no, I, I've always been horrible when it comes to online presence. I belong to Facebook and LinkedIn, and
Okay.
very rarely go to either one of them. I, I always thought, if I'm turning on that computer, I should be working. Um, which is why I don't have video games. I don't have any of the stuff on computers that everybody else has.
No,
Uh,
but I suppose they can check out 24/7 comics is where they can find out for when the project is announced. It'll probably be on their online handle and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there's always a chance Marvel will call me up and ask me to do a 10-page story for something somewhere along the line. But
Oh, awesome.
who knows?
Oh, yeah, it's obvious there's always tomorrow, as they say. But Tom, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. Really appreciate it and best of luck.
Thank you, and I wish you the best of luck with your future conversations.